Hey everyone, my name is Justin Odisho. Today we're going to be doing kind of an unorthodox but hopefully fun video doing a tier list for the video effects available in Adobe Premiere Pro. I'm going to do a folder by folder, rank them from S tier, which is going to be the best, to A, B, C, D, all the way to F tier, which is going to be the worst effects or useless effects that I think. So I haven't really planned this out. I'm just going to open up the effects folder. We're going to go folder by folder and chunk them out in general, and I'll build the tier list with you, hopefully have some fun and show you some cool different effects, as well as have some fun ranking the usefulness of them. So I'm just in Premiere, I've got a random clip open. The first folder that you'll see is the presets folder, and you know this is the presets because it has the little star next to the folder. So you have presets and Lumetri presets, which are just kind of like the LUTs that you'll find in the Lumetri color panel. If you go to the creative section, you have all these different LUTs as well. I have my own on my website and whatnot. But yeah, I do have my own preset packs. I'm going to be a little bit biased here. Obviously, that's not the point of this video. But presets, there's definitely so much different cool stuff you can do with them because you can combine all of the different effects and create kind of like your own effects with them. So the presets that come built in with Premiere, I'm not going to lie, they're kind of meh. They're just like kind of some simple functional stuff like picture in picture or a preset twirl in animation. But the presets that you can make, like effects and transitions, are really quite flexible with tons of different possibilities. So due to my preset packs and the flexibilities of presets, we're going to put presets in the S tier folder, as you saw. Great effects. If it was just the default ones that come built in, those might be like D tier. But the capabilities of presets, definitely S tier. So after that, we have audio effects. I'm not really going to go into folder by folder. This is more about video effects. But in audio effects, you have stuff like delay, echoes, flangers, chorus, stuff that you might be familiar with, like if you play guitar or if you're doing podcast type of voices, high pass or low pass filters. In general, let's just say audio effects are, we'll put them, they're cool. We'll put them in B tier. Like if I'm honest, I don't really use them too much. Like when you're editing audio, you're just going to be adjusting the volume for the most part, or just doing simple fade in and outs. But you know, there's some fun stuff in there. The audio transitions, however, it's kind of a useless folder. I mean, the transition is useful. Like sometimes if you just want to fade out of an audio, you just right click on the end of the clip, apply default transition, and that'll be the constant power is the default one. And you can tell which one is the default you can tell because it has this blue little rectangle around it. Or you can always right click and change anything else to be the default by setting it that way in the effects panel. But you know, it's just a constant fade out. It's very useful. Do you really need it in the effects menu? Not really. Is there much in here? Not really. I guess it would be kind of cool if there was like echo out or splash out or reverberate out. Fade out is a great, if I was just to do fade out, that would be an S tier effect, but we're just going to put them in C because the folder itself is kind of whack. All right, so carrying on, we have video effects folder. Now we're getting into kind of the meat of the video. So the first folder is the adjust folder. In here you have things like convolution kernel and extract, levels, lighting effects. Honestly, so a lot of these like levels and a lot of these effects that are going to come up, you can do in other areas of Premiere, like the Lumetri color section. You have options for, you know, exposure and contrast and whatnot, and curves. You can adjust the red, green, and blue channels individually in the curves. So a lot of times you're not going to want to do it in this slider way. When you like sliders in the effects panel, you'd want to do it in a more visual way. Truly, like one of the only cool effects in here is the lighting effects. It allows you to add like different spotlights and You can change them to different colors. So for that effect, it's cool, but for the most part, this folder is trash. So we'll put adjust in, should I do D tier? We'll do D tier because something has to be D tier. Don't take my ratings too seriously, but we'll keep going. All right, so next up we have blur and sharpen. Some real powerhouse effects in here, such as Gaussian blur. They may not be the most exciting effects, but function-wise, you're going to be reaching for the Gaussian blur a lot. You can even do horizontal or vertical blur. There's other cool blurs in here like channel blur and different things where you can just blur one channel. The sharpen effects, honestly, I don't use the sharpen effects too much, but if you are a sharp freak and you want everything, all the edges to be sharpened, you can. So although there are some trash effects in here that you don't really go for too much, for the fact that it has Gaussian blur and it is so functional, I'm going to have to say that the blur and sharpen folder, we'll say that's an A tier folder. Very functional. Maybe that's over. We can go back and adjust if I realize that it doesn't make sense. So next up we have the channel folder. This has some cool color channel things like invert. But honestly, besides invert, solid composite, I guess, is interesting. Like you can add just one solid color, but really that can be done in the new color matte as well. You can do the same thing, add a color matte and then add it on top and then put it on a blending mode. So all of these other ones like arithmetic and blend, I'm going to be honest, ain't nobody's really using those ones. So for the fact that it has invert, this folder is kind of redeemed because the invert effect can be cool, but we're going to have to put channel effects. Is it better than audio transitions? I don't know. We'll put channel effects in the C tier. Next up, we have the color correction. Again, you're going to be able to do all of this in the Lumetri color section, mostly for the most part now. So there are some cool effects in here though, like tint. Tint will allow you to do a black and white tint, or like like mapping the black to red, mapping the white or highlight colors to another color. That can be, it's an alternative to gradient maps in Photoshop. You can also change the percentage. And remember, you can keyframe and animate any of these and combine them on top of each other. You also have some interesting things like leave color. So if I only wanted the reds to be left and everything else to be desaturated, that can be pretty cool. But stuff like, you know, brightness, contrast, channel mixer, a lot of these other ones you're just going to be doing in the Lumetri color panel. So the actual color correction folder itself, again, we're going to throw it in the C tier. Maybe I'm being too nice, but if you do want more in-depth on these, by the way, as you're watching, I actually have a folder. I have a video playlist called Every Effect in Premiere Pro Explained and Every Effect in After Effects and Every Filter in Photoshop. I have video by video for each folder that actually goes into depth on each effect. If you feel like I'm skimming over in this video, this is just kind of more for fun. The next folder is the distort folder. It has some of my favorite effects, such as wave warp. Wave warp is one of the only effects in Premiere Pro that automatically animates without having to add keyframes, which makes it unique in itself. You have all kind of interesting things like twirl, transform. So while you may not be using these as much as like a Gaussian blur, you know, you're not always going to want to add a cool mirror effect. There's a ton of really cool stuff in here that is kind of the essence of what a video effect is. So for that reason, we're putting distort effects in, or it honestly could be S tier, but you know, you're not always trying to twirl something. But for the fun of it, it is definitely A, maybe S tier, depending on what type of edits you do. Next up, we have generate. So generate is cool because these are some of the only effects that actually are generative. They create something. They don't just transform the video, they create something from scratch. So you can create a 4-color gradient from scratch or create a ramp from scratch. And I'm applying it onto a video clip, but you can apply it just onto solids or whatever, solid black layers or black video clips and get the same thing. You have some stuff like lightning, which would probably be better off done in After Effects. But these are some of the only areas that you can create some different patterns, and checkerboards generates a solid B. Next up, we have image control. So in here, you have some stuff like really black and white might be the only quick one. Again, color balance, you can just do that in different ways in the Lumetric color panel. Color pass is kind of like leave color that we had before. You can pick one color and kind of make everything else pass from it. Color replace is kind of cool. Like, let's say I want this yellow piano to actually turn blue. You can try to do that, but there's again also other ways that you could change one color to the next. So in general, yeah, don't really love the image control folder too much. Not too much crazy of interest in there. Let's just throw that in the E folder. We're throwing that in the E tier. Next up, we have immersive video. So these are some really cool ones with like 360 or VR footage, but there's no reason that you can't apply them onto regular footage. It has some cool, unique effects that aren't really available in any other ways. Like VR glow is another cool one. Technically, they are used for transforming 360 footage either from a plane back to 360 or not. This is just regular HD footage, so it's not really functional in that regard. But yeah, most of the time you can still apply these on regular clips, like VR digital glitch works just fine. Chromatic aberrations, pretty cool, get the channel splitting. So even if you're not working with VR footage, I'm going to throw this in. We'll throw this. I could be stingy and put it in C tier. Like, is it better than channel and color correction? It's like C plus almost, maybe B, but we'll keep it in C tier just to be strict. The next effect that we have is keying. So some really useful stuff in here, like whenever you're working with green screen, basically the ultra key effect. Let's say I want to key out this pink flower and make it something else, There's tons of different ways that you can create keys and mats and then ultimately replace them with something else behind it. So in the matte cleanup section, you can like increase the tolerance. So in this way, we've keyed out that flower and we can fill it in with something else. But essentially, if you're working with green screens, this could be really useful. There's also tons of different ways to key, like luma keying. You can key it out by the brightness or darkness of the image, and this is where you get those transitions, like luma fade transitions that you can keyframe. So keying folder, I'll say just based on its functionality alone, we're going to put that, I mean, it could be A tier. It's like a really foundational effect. Like if you could only have a few folders, which ones did you have? This might have to be one of those ones that you have, but you're not always keying footage. I'm going to leave it in B tier for now, but we'll go back and do a final sweep through where I reorder and edit things like a true editor. The next folder we have is noise and grain. There's a bunch of different variations here, but basically noise is like it's like noise. There's just a bunch of variations of it, but adding noise can be really cool a bunch of times. Even if you're working with a solid color clip like earlier, adding noise onto that could add some texture to it for like a title background. Obviously not this much, but the cool part is noise is animated as well. So you can use it to replicate like film grain or defects, or use it to blend almost. If you're blending in a bunch of different compositions, you could add a thin layer of noise on top. And you also have things that try to remove noise, like dust and scratches and just different variations of the noise. So noise alpha will actually use the shape of the image to add noise, thus creating a transparency on what's underneath. I'm not mad at the noise folder. There's not much in it, but it is what it is. So we'll leave it in the C folder, even though I like it more than like some of these other ones. It's definitely not an F tier. Is anything an F tier? We'll see. Actually, I spoke too soon. obsolete folder. All of this stuff has basically kind of been replaced by newer ways to do stuff. So levels, blur, curves. It's just in here sometimes for backwards compatibility or really specific niche case reasons on why you might still have it. But yeah, everything in the obsolete folder is, as it says, kind of obsolete, just for the use of making. Technically, like, there's still fun times where you use it, but we're just gonna put obsolete in the F tier. If I was being nice, I could put it in like the E tier, but we're gonna put it in the F tier. Next up, we have perspective. So some cool stuff in here. You have basic 3D, which allows you to like swivel and tilt images, or I did a tutorial where I did screenshots that you could kind of animate in this way. You can also add different bevels and glows onto these things. So drop shadow or radial shadow. I guess drop shadow is cool because it's one way that you could create a glow on an actual video clip. Just increase the softness like that. So perspective, I think, is a neat little folder. Probably more for like logos, text, graphics, screenshots, and whatnot. So we're going to put perspective. Again, a lot of stuff is falling right in the middle at the C folder, but I'm not mad at the perspective folder right in the middle. So C, I guess in my grading book, isn't bad. C is right in the middle, and then things are falling below or above that, so that's naturally happening. The next folder is Stylized. So there's actually a bunch of different ones in here. It's kind of like maybe a brother or a cousin to the Distort folder because of unique effects in here. Cool stuff like mosaic if you want to pixelize stuff, posterization or brush strokes or different textures that you can do. Strobe light is a cool one with animation potential to like blink a color on and off. Find edges. There's a lot of interesting stuff in here, especially if you start to keyframe or combine it with other things. Even some functional stuff like emboss will kind of find the edges for you. And then if you add it on a blending mode, like overlay or multiply, you could use that for some sharpening effects. And there's even the alpha glow. We could throw it in the B section. I guess now that I'm getting into it, like, it's getting dicey. Stylized and immersive video in my mind are kind of close. Stylized and perspective are kind of close, but we'll throw Stylized in the B folder, in my opinion. Next up, we have time, and although there's only two effects in here, which are echo and posterized time, they're both honestly heavy hitters because these are some of the only ways that you can manipulate time on top of itself in Premiere. So adding an echo or posterizing the time so it's like only 6 frames per second or 6 frames at a time. Instead, it's kind of getting the stop motion look if you wanted. Both of them really cool and useful effects, and for that case it also helps that there's not just a bunch of useless junk in there. So we're going to put time, honestly, I'm going to put it as an A tier folder because it's lean and mean. It's lean, mean, and solid. Not saying it's more useful than generate. Like, it's getting dicey at this point. Some of these could move up or down a rank, but we're generally getting the proper distribution here, I think. Next up, we have transform. So you have things like crop, auto reframe, all really useful, honestly. I guess, horizontal and vertical flip are still useful, even though you might not reach for them too much. Edge feather is really the most useless effect in here, to be honest, but crop itself is a heavy hitter. So for that, we might also have to throw transform. If it's not an A tier, it's at least a B tier, but I'm getting generous now at the end. We're going to throw it in the A tier folder. Next, we have transition. So it's not what you think. There's actually a video transitions and a video effects, a video effect folder called transition. So in this one, it doesn't go in between the clips. It goes right on the clips, and you have a transition completeness parameter that you can keyframe from 0 to 100 or just leave at a static amount. But you don't have the most amazing things in here. Like, you have block dissolve, or like linear wipe is probably the most useful one. Like, I guess you can do some cool stuff with Venetian blinds. I have tutorials on doing interesting stuff with all of these, but gradient wipe is interesting as well because you can, this is kind of like how to do a luma fade. So Not the most mind-blowing stuff in there, but we'll throw that video effects transition folder solidly in a B tier. Next up, we have utility. This is really one effect Cineon converter when you're converting certain Cineon shot footage from linear to log shot format. So honestly, never use this because I don't convert Cineon footage, and I'm probably assuming 99% of you will not be converting Cineon footage. So love it for what it is. Shout out to Cineon footage and the fact that they can convert it, but we're going to throw that solidly in the F tier. It does what it does. Like, I'm not mad at it. Just because it's in the F tier doesn't mean it doesn't do what it does. But if I only had to bring a few effects onto a desert island with me, I'm not bringing the utility folder in my bag. So for that, we're just throwing it straight in the F tier. And lastly, we have video. Some useful stuff here, like you can burn in the clip name onto it. If you're working in between two different editors, you can quickly say like right on movie 317.mp4 that clip, what about frame number this? Or you can also do simple text as well, like if you just did want to say like stunt double shot, or this is kind of all for reference. You can burn in a time code as well, so the time code thing can kind of be useful. So you can use it for aesthetic reasons, like putting a time code in there for aesthetic reasons, or you can use it for if you're working between multiple editors. You could say right there on the 321 frame on the clip that's labeled A, what do you think about that shot? So for that case, you know, you're not reaching for this too much, but it's not a horrible folder. We can throw it in the D tier. I feel bad throwing video in the D tier because there's some neat stuff in there, but are we using it that much? I don't know. And lastly, I'm not going to go through every single video transition itself, but in here you have a bunch of different video transitions like cube spin or the default one is cross dissolve. Like I said, if you ever right click in between two clips and set the default transition, it will be cross dissolve, or you can actually make it whatever you want. So earlier I had it to dip to black, but if I right click and select default transition, cross dissolve is the default one. But you have a bunch of different ones. So although there are some stuff in here that's kind of like, you know, when are you ever going to use a page turn? Probably not too often unless you're doing like a storybook type of thing. But combining these with keyframed video effects, there's definitely a bunch of potential here. So we're going to throw the entire video transitions folder solidly in, I mean, it could be S tier. Like, that's kind of one of the foundational things in Premiere. So it's either A tier or S tier, but I'm going to throw it in the S tier because why not? And that completes the tier list for Premiere Pro video effects. That's my humble opinion. If I was to go back, let's see, like some of these you could flip-flop, like if we're going to throw transform, maybe transform would only be a B tier, or perhaps perspective. Some of these could move up and down. You let me know what you think in the comments, but in general, I think this is pretty accurate. Like presets, video transitions, blurs, distorts. It generally goes more useful. You're going to be using those a lot more. And then at the very bottom, like obsolete video effects, utility, image control. You're not really going to be reaching for those too much. If you want to dig deeper and more educational and step-by-step on how all of these different effects work and how to use them, you can check out my Every Effect in Adobe Premiere Pro Explained series, where I go over them all effect by effect, folder by folder. So if you guys enjoyed this video, let me know in the comments. You can follow me on social media at Odisho. Subscribe here on YouTube, check everything out, and I'll see you in the next video.